Today's presentations are by the winners of the Royal Society of Tasmania Doctoral Awards last year. These awards are offered annually to outstanding PhD graduates who are within 3 years after having finished their degree. Our first speaker is Dr. Pratiksha Srivastava. Dr. Srivastava is currently a postdoctoral research at IMDEA Energy in Spain. She completed her PhD at the National Centre for Maritime Engineering and Hydrodynamics at the Australian Maritime College, University of Tasmania. Her research focus is on microbe-electrode interactions for the development of sustainable technologies. Dr. Srivastava has made a major contribution to the efficiency of constructed wetlands using microbial electrochemical technology. Her sustainability research led to the prestigious Green Talent Award from the German Federal Ministry, and she's also been awarded a Nuffic Fellowship from the Netherlands. She's published more than 20 peer-reviewed articles. Her presentation this afternoon is Electron Exchange between Living and Non-Living Things for Developing Sustainability in the Environment. Over to you, Pratiksha.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining on your precious Sunday. First of all, I would like to thank Royal Society of Tasmania for this award. I was really very excited and thrilled when I found out that I got this award. So thank you very much once again. So today I'm going to talk about electron exchange between living and non-living things and how their interaction develops sustainability in the environment. Sorry, for some reason it's not working. Yeah. So before I start my presentation, I would like to acknowledge and thanks my supervisors, Associate Professor Vikram Garania from AMC Utah, Associate Professor Ruzbe Abbasi from Macquarie University, and Associate Professor Trevor Levis from School of Natural Sciences, Utah. This journey wouldn't be that easy without their support and help during my PhD, so I'm really very thankful for them for all their support. So let's start with the presentation. I will start with the motivation of my work. So with the increasing population, the demand of water is increasing every day because water is a necessity of life. And whenever there is use of water, whenever we use it, we create it into wastewater. We make it wastewater because we cannot reuse it. And think about how much population we are in all over the world and how much wastewater we generate every day. And the amount of energy it requires to treat wastewater is huge. And whenever there is energy involved in something that directly connect with the fossil fuel. And if there is involvement of fossil fuel, then definitely it's gonna impact the climate. And there will be definitely climate change, which we don't want actually. And this climate change is directly going to impact everyone. So we thought to think about some sustainable technology for the treatment of wastewater. And the technology which does not require a lot of energy or money to treat wastewater. So as I said, that we generate a lot of wastewater, but do you know that this wastewater contains a lot of energy, nutrients, and water for potential reuse? Based on some study, it indicates that till the year 2050, just from the Asia, we will generate approximately 250 billion meter cube of wastewater in volume. And the amount of energy it will have is approximately 802 billion kilowatt hour till 2050. So think about how huge it is. However, this wastewater also contains a lot of nutrient and resources within it, which can be used as a fertilizer or for other reuse purposes. So based on this, my goal was to treat wastewater and also to extract the resources this wastewater contains. So as I said, this wastewater contains a lot of nutrients, also organic carbon in it. When there is organic carbon, there will be a lot of microbes in the wastewater. And these microbes, they respire through oxygen. Similar way that humans do, we take oxygen or we respire through oxygen by putting our electron on the oxygen in the environment. And similar way, these microbes also respire in the wastewater with the help of dissolved oxygen in it. And as we need food for getting energy and to grow, they also need some food to grow and to get energy. And they use the dissolved pollutant in the wastewater to get the energy and to grow. And that is why they have very high potential to treat the wastewater by doing this oxidation and reduction reaction by this oxygen and pollutant dissolved in it. So their respiration is very useful for the treatment of wastewater. So when they provide the electron to the oxygen, that process is actually oxidation. And when they take energy from the dissolved pollutant in the wastewater, that process is reduction. And this oxidation and reduction process is very important for the treatment of wastewater. So as I said, they take electron from the dissolved water, wastewater. They mostly try to take soluble electron acceptors, I mean, oxygen such as, but at some moment or at some time, there is no dissolved oxygen in the wastewater when there is high or huge pollutant dissolved in it. So in that case, it is lack of soluble electron acceptor. And then these microbes, they try to take some help of solid electron acceptors. That could be magnetite, which is natural occurring iron. It is not in a dissolved form, and also graphite, which is a crystalline form of carbon. So they try to use this kind of electron acceptor to respire if there is no oxygen in the wastewater. And when they respire through this electron acceptor, they actually can generate electricity in a similar way as battery does. In battery, it uses chemical reactions to generate energy. And these microbes, when they interact with electron acceptors, they generate electricity by biological reactions. So I will explain briefly about electron transfer mechanism, like how they transfer electron to this electron acceptor instead of oxygen. So when there is solid electron acceptor, sometimes these microbes, they grow on the surface of the electron acceptor. They make a biofilm like a slimy layer, and they respire through this electron acceptor by providing the electron to the electron acceptor, which is called direct electron transfer. But in some cases, when they are far from the electron acceptor, in that case, they use their pili or they make a nanowire and they connect to the electron acceptor through it, and they respire through providing this electron to the electron acceptor by their pili or a nanowire. Or they use some soluble chemicals in the wastewater, which they use as a shuttle or mediator to transfer the electron to the electron acceptor. Or they grow on some other biofilm as a parasite, and they try to transfer the electron to the other biofilm, and they transfer the electron to the electron acceptor. And this is called indirect electron transfer. This is two types of electron transfer mechanism, which is very important for them to transfer electron and to generate electricity. So let's imagine a tank filled with wastewater. So if there is a wastewater, then there will be microbes. How we help them to use the solid electron acceptor when there is no oxygen? So we provide a solid electron acceptor at the bottom of the tank, and we also provide a solid electron donor at the top of the tank, and it's the same material we can use. And we connect this with the electric wire. And the organics or pollutant present in the wastewater, these microbes, they can feed on these organics and pollutant, and they get energy from these organics in the form of electron. And then this electron, they transfer to the solid electron acceptor. Now, this electron, after coming to the solid electron acceptor, move towards oxygen, which is in the environment. So oxygen is a very good electron acceptor, and it extracts electron very easily. And that's why when they feel like, okay, there is oxygen, they try to move towards the oxygen. And at the top, solid electron donor, this is actually donor because it collect all the electron from the bottom and donate it to oxygen. And that's why it is donor, but it's the same material as the bottom one. So that's how they transfer electron to the upper portion. And with the potential difference between these two portions, electricity generation occurs. So this technology is generally called as a microbial fuel cell. And we tried to adopt this technology into sustainable very sustainable technology, which we can use for wastewater treatment at a larger scale. So we use natural wetland. I mean, we don't use directly natural wetland, but we use wetland. I'm sure that most of you already know what wetland is. Wetland is a combination of plants, microbes, some substrate in the form of sand or soil or gravels. It can be anything, and sunlight. So this wetland is given by nature to us for the treatment of wastewater, actually. And these microbes, they treat wastewater just in a natural way. It doesn't require any chemical or any sophisticated instrument for the treatment of wastewater. But the thing is, this wetland, natural wetland, cannot be available everywhere. I mean, in your society, where you live, so it cannot be available everywhere. And that's why some engineer tried to make it into engineered form that is called constructive wetland. So it works similar to on similar principle as natural wetland. In the constructive wetland, wastewater also goes in from one end, and after flowing through all the bed, it comes out from the other end after treatment. All the mechanism and everything involved in constructive wetland is very similar to the natural wetland. But the problem is, since this constructive wetland is a shape of basin, most of the portion is anaerobic because oxygen cannot enter into the bed. And when there is no oxygen, these microbes cannot respire. Only the upper portion of the constructive wetland is aerobic because it is in the contact of atmosphere. But largely it is anaerobic. And that is why the treatment performance is mostly low. And also it requires a large land area for the construction for this kind of treatment facility. So we try to incorporate these electron acceptors and donor into this wetland. Since both it has anaerobic and aerobic region. So in anaerobic region, there is no other electron acceptor. So we provided this electron acceptor at the anaerobic region of the wetland. And at the top, where it is in contact of the atmosphere in the air, we provided another conductive material, solid electron donor. And we connected it with the electric wire. Now, microbes have artificial electron acceptor to respire through. and they can easily respire with the electron acceptor and enhance the treatment performance. And when there will be enhancement in the treatment performance, it will also require less land area for the construction. So that was the initial goal for us, to reduce the land area requirement and also enhance the performance of this constructor wetland. So my experiments were mainly based on this technique and this technology. So I tried to compare all my results with the normal wetland without this electron acceptor and donor in it. And the result indicate that the COD removal of, I forgot to mention that we call this technology CWMFC because we incorporated MFC into it. So the CWMFC performed very well, approximately 100% of removal in 24 hours. However, the normal one without electron acceptor and donor, the removal was lower in 24-hour duration. But we also tried to see the performance in different time interval, like 12-hour and 6-hour. And the removal was always high in the one in which we incorporated electron acceptors and donor in comparison to the one which did not have any electron acceptor. So this indicated that the microbes had limited electron acceptor in the normal one without electron acceptor, and it was hard for them to respire and to treat the pollutant. When we compared in terms of times of removal enhancement, we found out that 27 to 49% of enhancement was in CWMFC in comparison to the normal constructor wetland. Then we tried to see how much voltage we are getting from this kind of system. I mean, how much voltage these microbes can actually generate. We found almost 500 millivolt of voltage. And when we compared it with its COD removal, we found a strong correlation with the COD removal and the voltage performance. So when the COD was getting consumed by the microbes, they try to produce more voltage. So this is quite correlated with each other. I tried to see how these microbes looks when they grow on these electron acceptor and donors. So this is how they look. I mean, definitely they are like completely cover the electron acceptor, and the structure is also a little different because they had different kind of electron acceptor in it. So they were growing differently. I also tried to see how they work for ammonium, because ammonia is a major problem of wastewater. It requires a lot of energy because it needs a lot of oxygen for the oxidation into nitrogen gas or other intermediates. But the thing is, when there is involvement of oxygen, it requires a lot of energy and a lot of money. That is why we thought to see this kind of technology, how it works with the ammonium removal. And in this time, I tried to compare with 3 different kind of setup. In the first one, I tried to connect the circuit and make it closed circuit. In the second one, it was open circuit. And in third one, there was no any electron acceptor or donor artificially. So the treatment performance of the first one was significantly higher than the one which did not have any electron acceptor provided. And in comparison to the open circuit one as well, because in the open circuit constructor wetland, there was less opportunity for the microbes to put electron and to pass it to oxygen as a terminal electron acceptor. So the electron which was generating in the system was getting onto the electron acceptor, but it was not passing through. So there was buildup of electron at the solid electron acceptor in open circuit one. But when it was closed circuit, the electron was freely moving towards the oxygen. And that is why the treatment performance was higher in the closed circuit one. And we also try to find out what is the power density we can get from this system, and the highest power density we achieved was 25 milliwatt per meter cube from the closed circuit system. The interesting fact in this system was that the community of microbes involved in this was almost similar. They have almost in all the system, they had similar kind of community. But the only difference was that the microbes present in the closed circuit one had opportunity to respire through this electron acceptor. And that is why they were removing ammonium very efficiently. So these microbes have capability to interact with solid electron acceptor and transfer the electron in absence of oxygen, which is very fascinating for any wastewater treatment industries. And this is how they actually do. I mean, we still don't know the correct pathway, how they convert into nitrogen gas, but because there was no buildup of any intermediates in the system, we assume that the ammonium directly converts into nitrogen, which is very, I would say, a very efficient technique, because there will be less greenhouse gas emission as well with this kind of system. So as from this figure, you can see the conversion of ammonium to nitrate requires a lot of oxygen, only oxygen, nothing else. So that is why it's a very high cost demanding process. So we published this paper in Science of the Total Environment in the year 2020. And it is very popular nowadays among the scientists because it is a new process which was not very well known in the society yet. So I was talking about electrons, but how we can see the amount of energy we are generating, we can use it for some real purpose. So this time I tried to use a vertical constructor wetland, and I tried to harvest all the energy microbes are generating and collect it into the power storage system. And I operated an air pump, which we normally use in aquarium. And I tried to see if this electricity, which we are talking in theory, can do something in real field application. And this is the energy storage system. I tried to harvest all the energy from the system and store in this one. And I tried to operate air pump. I will show a small video actually. So this is what this electron generated from the microbes was doing. Actually, it was really operating an electric appliance, even though it's small, but at least we can save a lot of energy by using this energy into some small electric appliances. And I published this paper in Sustainable Energy Technology and Assessment last year. So this is it about my research, and the conclusion of my research is that the microbe-solid interaction has great environmental impact. With their interaction, we can do a lot to save the environment and to stop or slow down the climate change impact. And the microbial electricity generation has really great potential to operate even small electric appliances. The electron transfer can enhance the pollutant removal efficiency in the constructor wetland, and it can be useful for wastewater treatment industries to save a lot of energy and money from it. It can treat, and simultaneously it can recover resources from the wastewater. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. If you have any question, feel free to ask.
So thanks very much, Pratiksha. And I would encourage anybody who's online and has a question to go ahead and type it into the Q&A, and we should be able to ask it on your behalf. I just have an initial question, Pratiksha. With the using the solid either magnetite or graphite. Is getting enough of either graphite or magnetite a problem, or do you actually use only tiny amounts of either of those solids?
It depends how much wastewater we are trying to treat actually. So if we are talking about natural environment, there is already magnetite and graphite kind of electron acceptor present in the wastewater. So we don't need to provide externally anything. But if we are talking about like wastewater treatment industries or something, it depends how much wastewater we want to try, but it does not require a lot of magnetite or graphite or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, right. So we have a question about the scale, and you've demonstrated the ability of this arrangement to run a small electric thing. How about treating wastewater and generating electricity on a much larger scale?
Yeah, I mean, at this moment, there is 2-3 companies here in Europe who works on this technology, and they have like large scale implication of this technology for treating wastewater for the community level. So it works very well for them.
Right. Okay. So they're actually developing on a scale that a city's wastewater could be treated, or is that too far?
Yeah. No, yeah, they are treating city wastewater actually on a community level.
Right. Oh, that's terrific. Okay, and I have another question. If someone wanted to install a wastewater treatment plant for their own home in the country, how would they go about doing this? Is it possible to do it? Are there companies that you could ring up and say, please do this for me?
Yeah, nowadays, yes, there is a company, in fact, in Spain, and they are doing it for different countries. Recently, they did it for China, and they are building community level wastewater treatment technology based on this technology, like using these solid electron acceptors in filling the system with it. Yes, and it works very well and treat very well for so far.
So one more question. Do you think that microbes, conductive materials interactions can happen naturally in the environment without needing to construct anything?
Yeah, as I said, that this kind of electron acceptor is already present in the environment. We don't need to put them externally. So magnetite is actually natural occurring electron acceptor, and it can also work as an electron donor. So it's already available in the environment. Also graphite or any other carbon, it can work as an electron acceptor or in some cases as donor as well. So these are already present in the atmosphere. Yeah, maybe there will be some contaminated site where it is not present. Only thing we can do is wherever it is present, we can put this kind of thing into the contaminated site for the treatment. And that's all.
Right, okay. Thank you. And one last question. Is your current research that you're doing in Spain a new direction, or is it developing further what you did for your PhD?
Actually, it's a kind of a little bit related with the electron transfer. Definitely, I'm working on electron transfer, but this time I'm trying to also see some other kind of energy present in the wastewater to extract those kind of energy. So for now, I'm working on hydrogen energy to extract from the wastewater.
Right.
But yeah, the concept is still similar, what I used to do in Tasmania.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pratiksha. We'll close your presentation now. Thanks very much. You've obviously put a terrific amount of effort into communicating what is clearly a very complicated subject, but you've done it very effectively. And I'd also like to congratulate you on being a winner of one of our doctoral awards last year. Well done. Our second speaker is Dr. Rhonda Waterworth. Dr. Waterworth is a lawyer and a psychologist. So this is going to be a completely different subject from the one that we were just hearing about. Dr. Waterworth completed a PhD in the schools of psychology and social sciences at the University of Tasmania in therapeutic jurisprudence and ways in which the courts and magistrates can help to prevent reoffending. Dr. Waterworth is the author of several articles on magistrate interventions and the use of health and legal systems in relation to those with mental health problems and suffering trauma. She's also published articles on opportunities and techniques for applying therapeutic jurisprudence in criminal courts. And one of these articles has been incorporated into a handbook for magistrates in New South Wales. Dr. Waterworth is currently resident in France and works in private practice, as well as lecturing at the Catholic University of Lyon. Her presentation is the Therapeutic Potential of Magistrates and Court Systems. So over to you, Rhonda.
Thank you for that really lovely introduction. To start with, I just want to apologize if I seem a bit flustered this morning. I'm not 100% well, but the show will go on. So first of all, I want to say thank you to the Royal Society of Tasmania. It's incredibly kind to receive this award. I was quite surprised. It came at a very difficult point in my life, and it was really lovely to have the work recognised. I also want to thank my supervisors for their ingenuity, enthusiasm, and sheer dogged determination. They were incredibly helpful, and also the magistrates and other researchers who helped with this research, because it would have been very difficult to do without other people's help. Although the articles were written by myself and the research was done by myself, I had a lot of encouragement, and I relied on the wisdom of other people as well as my own professional experience to get this done. It may seem a bit of a change of pace, hey, after the last speaker. Thank you so much, Pratiksha. That was a fascinating presentation. Actually, it was incredibly interesting. My presentation is nowhere near as scientific, obviously, nowhere near as detailed. And it talks more about concepts and ideas and systems. So sort of like in Pratiksha's presentation, we were looking at very fine focus on very microscopic interactions and what that looks like and how to harness them. My research is kind of bigger picture, sort of looking at systems and how systems interact, and again sort of focusing in on interpersonal interactions within those systems and how to harness them. Now, I guess in my research, I'm not harnessing them to make electricity. That was fascinating, and I'm incredibly inspired by that, actually. If only we could do that with court systems. I'm trying to harness, I guess my research is aimed at trying to harness these interactions to create therapeutic change. When I talk about therapeutic change, what I'm talking about is change in behavior for defendants. So a person is accused of a crime, they're charged, they go before a judge, usually a magistrate. My research, I guess I have to say, that's focuses on lower level courts. It's not focusing on high level crime. It's focusing on, the petty courts, basically, magistrates courts, where the bulk of offences are dealt with. Goes before a magistrate, they have an interaction. Maybe they receive a fine, maybe they receive a custodial sentence, maybe they get a talking to, and then what happens after that? So I guess my work as a psychologist, I had the opportunity and also I guess you call it good luck or bad luck, depending on your point of view, to work in roles where I was following clients, patients, mental health patients, sometimes adolescents, sometimes adults who had severe mental health concerns, and their families, going through in and out of court systems. And I had the opportunity to watch what would happen over sequential court hearings, and to see how at some points in time, a court intervention was an incredibly therapeutic experience and could really be a point of change in my clients' lives, and at other times it was actually a criminogenic experience. I guess all of that put together then led me to want to use court systems more effectively and to look at ways of trying to make sure that firstly mental health patients, that's the focus of my research, and now more just the general population who are passing through magistrates' courts, how they could have a different experience in court that would be more likely to change their behaviour. If we take a step back and we think about how courts are meant to function, ideally they change behaviour. I mean, in the initial first instance, they stop the criminal activity. But the long-term effect that I guess society is hoping for is a change in behaviour so that it doesn't happen again. Unfortunately, pretty much all of the research I've read that looks at court experiences and court experiences and custodial sentences, so the two things together and or separately, is that they are mostly criminogenic, which is particularly unfair in terms of the effect that it has on magistrates and the effect that it has on defendants. So I guess my research looked at how to make better use of court systems as a therapeutic intervention tool, because I guess I'd seen that work professionally with some of my most difficult patients where other systems and other types of therapy were just not working. That's the other thing to keep in mind, is that the systems that we have in place now, some of them are quite effective for some patients, but there is a significant chunk of patients that exist in treatment systems, despite them being extremely well designed, research-based, evidence-based, and enacted by highly competent professionals. They just don't work for some groups of the population, unfortunately. Those groups of the population are very, very likely to come in contact with magistrate courts. So I guess there's another scope for intervention. And I saw therapeutic jurisprudence courts, particularly in Victoria, where I had the opportunity to sit on the Dandenong drug court, for example. I saw them work incredibly well in situations where most of the techniques that I come across professionally would not have worked. So that's kind of the background to my research. So as it says on the slide, magistrates and judges are extremely well placed to have a positive impact on offender outcomes. It's useful to make more efficient use of court resources. I need to be very clear though, this research is not designed to put more pressure on magistrates who are quite often already under fairly strict time constraints and professional workload. It's actually designed to help give them more options in terms of how they interact, more of a toolkit, to see if that can actually help have a better chance of them not seeing the same offenders repeatedly over the next 20 years, depending on how long they're in the same court. Okay, so I focused on courtcraft, which is it's the therapeutic intervention skills used by a judge within a courtroom interacting with the defendant. And what I did, big overview, the larger view, I created a behaviorally anchored description of a judge's contribution in the courtroom, and a description of, I wonder if I can get rid of this because I'm looking my slides. Maybe not, doesn't matter. Described a description of the behavior that gives the best chance of facilitating a therapeutic change for a court participant. That was the first time that had been done in the literature, and hopefully, I'm hoping it's quite useful. Since the publication of my research, a few other people have also started doing this, creating descriptions, or not actually creating descriptions, more trying to measure what judges are doing from a therapeutic perspective. A few people had tried it beforehand as well, but they hadn't really looked at the literature in terms of how best to do that from a psychological perspective, because there's a large body of literature about how best to do that. All right, I'm going to move on. So I tend to waffle. Okay, the role of judges. So, and this is sort of heading into potentially contentious territory, because depending on the political ethos of the time in the country, sometimes the general population and political discourse sees judges as having a therapeutic role, and sometimes they don't. I guess the research into the effects of court systems kind of indicates that judges can have quite a strong therapeutic role, and we could possibly try and make use of that. So core judicial competencies are, and these are the ones that most people would generally agree with, and that are also usually enshrined in legislation, more or less, depending on the jurisdiction. These are adjudication, investigation, and delivering and authorizing coercive sanctions. Judicial roles and actions are culturally and legally determined. And I think that's really important because I haven't said politically determined, but they kind of are to some degree. I guess that's maybe something some people would argue about as well. Judicial roles and actions are also evolving. And I think this is useful to bear in mind with this research is that if you look back across history, the role of a judge and how what a judge is supposed to do in a judicial situation has been evolving. And more recently, in quite a few different jurisdictions, that's also included facilitating therapeutic change. So rehabilitation goals, essentially. So most common law jurisdictions now include rehabilitation goals in their sentencing legislation and procedures, which is kind of exciting and hopefully heading in the right direction from where I sit. Okay, therapeutic potential of courts. So from a pragmatic analysis, the court experience is a powerful facilitator to develop and witness new narratives. What do I mean by a new narrative? What I mean by that is, okay, narrative is like a term taken from narrative therapy, which is one of the fields of therapeutic intervention that I looked at. And witness to a new narrative is basically an experience where a person is in a public situation with other people, and people are witnessing their experience and their experience of identity in that moment. So if you think about it, a court is one of the ideal situations to create a new experience via witnessing and a new sense of self to some degree, because that experience then becomes part of that person's sense of self and their idea of who they are, what they're capable of, and where they sit in society, how much respect they deserve, I guess, amongst many other things. And most importantly, those things then go on to influence what they're going to do next. The court has a legitimate power to hold systems, organizations, and people accountable. This is really important because quite often what would happen, despite everyone's best intentions and funding and competence and everything else, is that quite often for some people in the most complex and difficult circumstances, nothing worked. Systems would not work for whatever reason. The housing application wouldn't work, the funding application wouldn't work, the school services, the child services, all the things that were supposed to work in a specific way kind of wouldn't, or they would work in their normal way, but the effect of their interaction would actually be more traumatic and actually very counterproductive quite often. So the court has a legitimate power to hold those systems, organizations, and people accountable. By accountable, it doesn't mean that those people are not doing their job. It's more making them sit back and have a think about what's going on for this particular person and what's going to work. And then try and make sure that that happens. And that's certainly what I saw when I sat in attended on drag court. It was fantastic. The court also has access to the resources necessary to enable effective intervention and treatment. Ideally, everyone has the same access to resources in a just society. That's my personal point of view, but we're not living in a just society. No one is really worldwide. So for some people who are heading along a trajectory that looks quite damaging for them and for their communities and everybody else around them, it's really useful to have someone who has power to step in and try and change that. Not saying that judicial officers are completely responsible for therapy. One of the fundamental things about having a therapeutic effect or an intervention is that you have to, and this is something that you learn as a psychologist, gets drilled into you, you're not responsible for the outcomes. You're responsible for the process, for how things occur, which is the process, and you're responsible for your own competence, but you're not responsible for what the person chooses to do afterwards. However, if we know that certain things make it more likely that a person might make better choices later on, it would be really useful to put those things in place. Okay, therapeutic potential of judges. So this is where I'm going to talk about TJ, which is therapeutic jurisprudence. So much to my delight, I discovered that there was already a whole field of knowledge aimed at trying to make courts more therapeutic, basically. So the therapeutic jurisprudence literature unanimously describes judges as active facilitators of therapeutic change. That's their stance. And I guess they note as well that courtroom appearances have the potential to be a healing experience. The court can become a facilitator of change and participant empowerment. Empowerment is a really interesting word, which we'll probably get back to. Actually, no, I'll discuss it a bit more now. So the thing about empowerment is that empowerment literally means the person feels that they have the sense of the capacity to have some kind of effect, that their actions have some kind of effect on their life or on things that matter to them. It's great to have that, and the sense that something they do might matter is really, really important. And the systems around also need to facilitate it. So what you don't want, and what has often happened for a lot of the patients that I used to work with, is that they've had multiple experiences of thinking that what they do might matter, and then they do something and it absolutely doesn't matter at all. They get the same outcome regardless, which becomes incredibly disempowering. So a court process can be a particular point in time where we could potentially change that pattern of what you do doesn't matter, which is fundamental if we want people to do things differently. And I said, I've got in brackets, rather than having the opposite criminogenic or revolving door effect, which has been noted by the research. Which is not to say the judges aren't doing their job, it's just that what, unfortunately from a psychological perspective, quite a lot of defendants defend themselves psychologically in their during the court experience and opt out of the experience psychologically, and it actually reinforces their experience of the world as it stands, rather than creating a different experience. So I also built on the work of Michael King and his fantastic book, Solution Focused Judging. So he translated narrative therapy and solution focused therapy techniques into the courtroom, which was a little bit of what I did, but not 100%. It was a good place to start, and it was incredibly helpful what he did. Seminal, really. So why is this important? Effective court intervention using good court craft can reduce recidivism, reduce criminalization and other social problems. I'm just checking the time, and help prevent social exclusion and radicalization, which is probably more relevant in France, the radicalization process. That's what I'm currently writing on at the moment. Basically, how does it work? It creates, it intervenes in complex real life situations where existing therapeutic services are proven to be inadequate and may actually cause harm. What I mean by may actually cause harm is that despite everyone's best intentions, the processes by which a health service, like a mental health service and community functions, for example, often sheds people. It sheds people outwards if they don't engage. And a lot of people who have the most complex mental health conditions and the most complex life situations, they don't engage for many, many different reasons, not just because they don't want to. That's sometimes the case, but quite often because there's significant barriers that stop them, and or the engagement process can actually be quite traumatic. So they don't want to, because it's like an avoidance protective reaction. All right, so what is good court craft? So it describes the way in which the judge interacts with the defendants in court. It touches on the way that ideas are described, the language used, the tone of voice, the posture, turn taking, etc. Good court craft, based on the research, has the best chance of facilitating change for a defendant as a direct effect of the court experience. So I guess this is looking at what magistrates can do in the actual courtroom, as well as potentially giving sentences that have therapeutic goals. So it's slightly different from some of the things in place, for example, regarding court diversion, where mental health clients are diverted directly out of the courtroom rather than going through a court process, or some of the programs that are used in the therapeutic courts, particularly in Victoria, where the defendants are sentenced, and then the sentence is the therapeutic kind of, that sentence is kind of the therapeutic process. Although the therapeutic courts themselves unanimously, from what I've seen, use extremely good court craft. Up till now, there hadn't been a way of measuring that, describing it, which is what my research developed. So the research compiled a behavioural description of what good court craft looks like in a courtroom setting. And this was based on an analysis of several parallel research fields. So I looked at, on the next slide, no. What I looked at in terms of my research, the parallel fields of research was firstly psychology. What are the fundamental universal determinants of therapeutic outcome, which is basically Therapeutic Alliance. So I looked at how to develop and use Therapeutic Alliance in a court setting. Also looked at legitimacy of justice, which is how to make the justice system more legitimate. What processes, what things need to occur in an interaction for the defendant to feel like the judge has a legitimate right to comment on their situation. And procedural justice, as well as therapeutic justice. So procedural justice is what processes need to occur and in what order and why, and how, basically, sorry, so that the participants feel like the outcome is actually reasonable from their perspective. It's not just something imposed. It's actually, oh yes, I agree with this, the authority of this person in this process. So I put all of that together and I created a behavioral description of useful magistrate behavior. So what that looks like: introductions, carefully explained, neutral, inviting active participation. Discussion about the problem. So neutral and open questions need to talk about the context. Need to include the court participants' own words and definition of the problem. These are all therapeutic techniques as well from psychology. Notice and discuss the defendant's strengths as well as existing supports. Notice and discuss the point of view and experiences of other participants. Notice and discuss the point of view of victims as well and bystanders and significant people involved in the defendant's life. Sentencing remarks. The summary for sentencing or judgment ideally includes not just a sentence that's got therapeutic kind of aims, but also a collaborative definition of the problem and the parties involved. It really helps for defendants who have trauma or are anxious, and most of them probably are, unless they're really strong sociopaths. So it really helps in terms of them understanding and participating psychologically in the process, to have all of the process put together and wrapped up really succinctly using language that they can understand and including their own words. Because if it includes nothing to do with them, they basically go, well, the judge didn't understand what was going on, he didn't care, and the sentence doesn't make any sense to me. It's literally the feedback I've had from patients who've not had this happen. And it meant that the court experience made them less engaged from society and the legal system, and social order, not more engaged, which is kind of more engaged is what you want. So you want a collaborative definition of the problem and the parties involved. Internalize responsibility for action for the court participant. Now that is crucial, because unless a person feels like they are responsible for their actions, they're not really motivated to change their actions because they're not responsible. So you want to highlight the defendant's choices over actions. Quite often people are so traumatized, stressed, financially disenfranchised, and living basically in a whirlwind, psychologically speaking, that they don't realize the range of choices that they have. They don't stop to think about it, and they're not operating with the same level of cognitive resources as someone else potentially, particularly if they're highly traumatized. You want to highlight the context and the possible supports available. And you also want to include an acknowledgement of the possible experiences of other people who are involved in the problem situation, like the victims, for example. You want to put all of that together in easy language so that the person can integrate that. Okay, then we're talking about judicial communication skills. So Judicial Alliance. Ideally, you want, and this might be difficult for some situations, and that's completely understandable. But ideally, you want the judge to be positioning themselves with the defendant, but against the criminal behavior. It's that externalization where it's like the defendant has to act on the criminal behavior and position themselves with regards to that behavior. And the judge is their ally in that process to try and change what's going on, to make sure it doesn't happen again. You use open questions, active listening skills. These are all counseling micro skills, actually. Attentive and encouraging body language. Non-verbal prompts to encourage the court participant to express themselves, because otherwise it's very likely that they won't. Adapt language and speed of speaking to the court participant. Check comprehension, because quite often, most of the patients I worked with were very good at faking that they understood. They would just smile and wave, basically, and they didn't understand quite often what was going on, which in turn made them less likely to cooperate or fit within other people's rules. Turn taking is incredibly useful, and you need turn taking to collaboratively construct a dialogue. So you want ideally a dialogue occurring between the defendant and the judicial officer, because it's going to engage that defendant and it will help them buy into the process. And then the more they buy into the process, the more likely it is to have an effect on future behavior. So the applications, I'm sorry, we're running out of time, I think. Yeah, applications of the qualitative. So I created a qualitative measure of judges' therapeutic courtroom behavior, which is basically a checklist of what is the judge doing in the courtroom, and from a therapeutic perspective, how to measure it. It's not quantitative, so you can't compare scores, and it's not like there's a score that's good enough or a score that's not good enough. It's basically a description, but it's a comprehensive way of describing it. It's useful for research fundamentally because researchers into the effects of courts had a major confounding variable, which was judicial contributions. They didn't have a way of measuring it, at least not reliably, or at all. It's helpful for research into specialist courts and their effectiveness, because quite often, politically speaking, it's happened in the UK, it's happened in Australia, it's happened in other places. A lot of money, time, and effort goes into setting up a specialist court for drug use, domestic violence, mental health. And then there's a change in politics, and it's like people want to know, is this court effective? It's costing a lot of money. Why are we funding this? And it's really difficult to research whether it's actually working, because one, it's difficult to define success, because therapeutic interventions can sometimes be delayed over time. And a very small thing from the outside could be a massive thing for that person in terms of change. It's the first thing. Recidivism is not necessarily the best measure, but it can be a measure of effectiveness. But this actually helps to measure whether judicial officers are having a therapeutic input, and that removes one of the major conflicting variables in that process. Because if they're not, the court system is probably not going to work as well in terms of outcomes. It's really useful potentially for magistrate training. For magistrates who want to develop their therapeutic skills, they can use self-evaluation of their own court recordings. And it's a building block, I guess, as well. It's open, it's available for people to pull it apart, reuse it, change it in different ways, adapt it to their situations and what they need it for. All right. Applications of long-term can reduce recidivism and other problems that go along with that, such as overcrowded prisons, endemic criminality in certain locations and families and economic groups, and to intervene to help those suffering from mental health problems to change their situation. So that's, I think, that's my lecture. Sorry, it's been a bit rushed. I need to also be really clear that this research is not designed as a criticism of magistrates, because I think, I mean, anyone performing that role, it's a very high demand role, and you know, it's a really difficult role to begin with. I don't think I could do it, but it's more designed as an aid for those magistrates who'd like to incorporate therapeutic practices into their courtrooms, because it could also be protective for themselves and have those other effects that we talked about. All right, does anybody have any questions?
In fact, there are some questions, Rhonda. That was terrific. Obviously, you've drawn us into a completely
different world.
Yes, but one of extremely interesting. One of the questions I would like to put to you is, of all the factors affecting recidivism, where would you place or rate judges' behaviour?
Oh man, that's really difficult. Firstly, do you want me to stop sharing my screen?
No, I don't.
No, it's good. Okay, that's all right. Because it just went black in front of me, and I was.
Yep.
Just don't touch anything. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
so in terms of recidivism, where would I place judges' behaviour? So, it really depends. So the best answer to that is not me. It's actually research. So I read a study last night, actually, because I'm preparing, updating everything too. For the article that I'm writing at the moment, but I read a study last night which was basically charting interventions with the judicial system for teenagers and young adults and older adults. And what they found was that intervention in a court system, experiences of courts, like being in a court, many different aspects. But court systems themselves had significantly negative effect for younger adolescents, also and young adults, and it had a unfortunately a criminalizing kind of effect. And I guess that kind of it's not the judge's fault, it's not the court system's fault, it's an inadvertent effect. And I guess this is what the research is designed to address. But it's not just my research, there's been quite a few different people researching the effects, the criminogenic effects of court systems, and also imprisonment, and also being in the watch house prior to being charged. And all of those things had significantly negative effects. So the more times a person had been through a court system, the more likely they were to go through a court system. I mean, there's many different compounding variables with that. You could argue that it's an antisocial personality disorder, and that's what's driving it. and that some people are just naturally bad, I guess. But I guess what you find if you look at the trajectory of those people, if you trace it back through their lives, and I guess what I saw with my teenage patients who had attachment disorders, who were developing quite often antisocial personality traits, was that the experience of going to court and being labelled in a particular way and being misunderstood, not that they, it was very clear that they'd done the wrong thing and that they shouldn't have done what they did, but the effect of being kind of like judged for it and not having their voice incorporated and then being punished for it in a way that seemed quite arbitrary and not related to the crime kind of reinforced that view of society as well as not really applying. And particularly also experiences of being in the watch house were quite traumatic for most mental health patients and most of my clients, and I think probably for the general population. And I guess imprisonment is a fairly large chunk of research that shows that imprisonment is quite criminogenic as well. So I veered off your topic of your question, and I guess what it is, I'm trying to not blame judges, because it's not, they're doing their job and they're doing their job well. The question is their job may need to be slightly different.
Thanks, Rhonda. There's a second question. What have been the reactions of psychologists and counsellors to judges participating in the therapy process?
Okay, so I can't speak for the entire psychological profession. And I guess I'm a little bit removed at the moment with my current situation, but the team that I used to work with, who had clients that were going in and out of juvie, basically juvenile detention via the court systems, we were always delighted when a court experience produced a change. Absolutely over the moon.
Yes.
Because I guess we're working in a multi-systemic therapy kind of lens, which is where everybody in that person's environment, you try and harness their therapeutic potential. So supporting foster carers, supporting teachers, supporting school principals, supporting police officers responding to call outs for the clients, supporting the whole system, doctors, all the people interacting with that person, trying to harness the therapeutic potential. So in that team, in that context, with that orientation, we were delighted. I think there's definitely your average psychologist, again, not speaking for the whole profession, but I would hope that given that our professional orientation, I think they'd be quite happy to see that work well. And I guess what a judge is doing in a courtroom is significantly and qualitatively different from what a psychologist or a counsellor or another therapist would do in a therapeutic setting.
Right.
So they're not, it's not exactly the same at all. It's just adapting some of the most crucial elements and processes.
Thank you. And this will probably have to be our final question. How adaptable is this new approach to courtcraft into other contexts? Because obviously you developed it within the probably Tasmanian, Victorian, certainly Australian context. Can you see it being applicable in other jurisdictions?
Yes. So the therapeutic jurisprudence movement is kind of international.
Okay.
You could argue it's sort of an American invention, but it's present in pretty much all common law jurisdictions, and quite a few civil law jurisdictions and other places like Japan, for example. They were presenting at the last international conference. So it's kind of that need for courtcraft and the impetus to have therapeutic principles and guidance within courts, like mainstream court systems, not just therapeutic courts, is it's present in most jurisdictions that I've come across. It's always a minority voice in every jurisdiction, but it's present. Yeah, and I guess at the moment, the article, like the research I'm doing at the moment, is adapting, looking at opportunities for that within the French court system, and adapting the ideas to French judicial officers.
Okay, thank you. It's pretty much the time that we should end the session. So thanks very much, Rhonda, and I'd like to also congratulate you on being a winner of one of our doctoral awards last year. Very well done. So that brings us to the end of this afternoon's presentations, and I hope you've been as impressed as I have with this amazing pair of absolutely outstanding presentations from what are very recent graduates, and very impressive performances from our two speakers this afternoon.